Thank you. Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, January 18th. This is the first meeting of the Education and Culture Committee for 2024. And Happy New Year to everybody. I'm the chair, Will Jwando. I'm joined by my colleagues, Gabe Albernaz and Kristen Mink, on the committee. And we have a couple of CIP-related items today. We'll talk about the FY25 to 30 capital improvements program for Montgomery College and for Montgomery County Public Schools. Start that discussion. I always am struck by the importance of the CIP because it's literally the infrastructure with which our students are learning and how important it is for them to reach their potential. I'm really proud that last year we took some action to keep a lot of things on track within the CIP. And make some changes. We'll be reviewing all projects as this is a full year of the capital improvements program that we do every 2 years. As required by law, the college and MCPS submitted their requests for the FY25-30 CIP near the end of last year. And this past Tuesday, we sat with the county executive virtually. Hope he's feeling better to present the recommended CIP, which includes adjusted funding for the college and MCPS. So today is, as I mentioned, our first session as we take up the CIP and marks the start of our budget process in this regard. And so we look forward to evaluating, hearing from the college and MCPS, and then in subsequent sessions working through the executive's recommendations and with our staff to put all the pieces together. It's always a challenge, but we're looking forward to it. So I'm going to turn it over to our staff. Is it going to be Mr. Krupe today to talk about anything in the packet, and then we'll turn it to our guests. And I think we have the college first. Yes. Okay. Let's start with Dr. Williams. Actually, you have two mics, so you can choose which one you want. But Dr. Williams, good to see you and your team. So. If you have anything you'd like to say at the beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. Good afternoon. We'll say good afternoon. Start with that. I hope everyone's having a fantastic new year. So far, on behalf of the faculty, staff, obviously the students of Montgomery College, I want to say thank you for your continued commitment. And thank you for having us here, being able to talk a little bit about the Education and Culture Committee. Absolutely knows the importance of quality facilities. Chair Jawando, as you just mentioned, these are the places and spaces where our students and the residents who we seek to serve are going to learn and grow, and where our faculty and staff are going to provide excellent learning and development opportunities for them in order for us to be able to build the homegrown talent pool that our county needs, both for today and for tomorrow. And to do that, community college students, specifically the more than 40,000 community college students that are supported by Montgomery College across this county, they need high-quality classrooms and labs, right? And with the increased interest in MC, your support remains vital. And I say increased interest. We talk about access. We talk about our transformational aspirations of the college around access, completion, and post-completion success. And in terms of access, as some people will say, enrollment, we have seen a 3.8% increase in enrollment in our credit-bearing opportunities year over year from fall to fall. And I'll say with enhanced partnerships and outreach and scholarship strategies and academic offerings, we're able to engage new and different populations. So we're really excited about that equitable approach. And it really does say that no matter what your zip code, you have a fantastic educational opportunity at Montgomery College. Today, I'll just spend a few minutes, just wanted to highlight, uplift some things, projects across the campus, really the renovation of the Rockville Library, the renovation of Theater Arts, the second phase of the renovation of the Pollard Building, and of course East County, and just a really small point about, which I'll make right now, the resources for technology and deferred maintenance projects. And when we think about our aging facilities and kind of the fiscal approach to really keeping those facilities viable, right, I was consider that our library and our theater arts project really fall into that. They're both on our Rockville campus. These specific projects are, and I hope we can keep these projects moving forward. We know the importance of libraries. I went to college decades ago. Libraries have changed immensely They provide technological support. They provide quiet and safe spaces for our students to meet and discuss. They provide books. We buy books that some of our students and future students cannot afford. So the library provides that opportunity for them. Theater arts, similarly, is critical. This is an academic building. I know it's called theater arts, but this is an academic building that supports an academic program at the college and also brings in the community, right, to experience art and culture. And it is in need of some care in order for us to keep things moving with that. Keeping projects moving on our Germantown campus is also imperative, and thankfully the design of our Student Services Center is finally positioned to kick off later on this year. However, we need to anchor the second phase of the renovation of the Dr. Darian Pollard Student Affairs and Science Building, which is also on the Germantown campus and in the capital budget. And the total renovation, as I'm sure at least a few of you know, was split into two projects, just to be kind of fiscal austerity and to be fiscally prudent. With the first phase completed several years ago, it's time to begin that next phase. And when we think about that next phase, we're really talking about modern classrooms for subjects like engineering, physics, math, again, preparing our local homegrown talent for the jobs of today and the jobs of the future. I'll end in just a moment, but I couldn't end without East County. East County, I know, very exciting and a passion for everyone. We continue to make progress on the East County Education Center on Broadbirch Drive. Construction is moving forward at a good pace, and happy to report some weedy information, but our long-awaited HVAC units are now installed. They are there. It's great, and as a result, the ECEC, East County Education Center, is still on target to open later this spring. And looking at having training courses as soon as it opens. Our target for that is April as far as the opening, and credit courses in the summer. So very much looking forward to that. Our college is in the process of completing the facilities master plan. It's something we put toward the state every 10 years. And one of the exciting pieces about this is that for the first time ever, what's in that FMP, that facilities master plan, is an East County campus presence, right? So we have now, and we can't move forward unless we submit those items to the state. So we continue to be dedicated to an East County campus presence, as well as an immediate East County Education Center presence. And we're just, again, truly excited and want to thank you again for your leadership, again, for having us here, not only today, but in the past, in the places and spaces that are not confined by these walls. When you come visit, when we see you out in the community, just thank you for everything you do, and happy to have any questions after things have been going over. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you, Dr. Williams, and really appreciate the updates and the energy you always bring when giving them, because I know how much you and your team love what you do. So, Mr. Groupie, Mr. Wire, we'll turn to you and run through the packet, and then we'll see if there's discussion. Obviously, we are not making any decisions today. I know you haven't had a chance yet to respond to the executive's CIP this week, but there's obviously a delta there, so we'll talk. This is an overview. We'll see where we are, and we'll be able to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair DeWando. As you mentioned, the purpose of this meeting is to hold a preliminary discussion and receive an overview on the college's requests for the Capital Improvement Program budget. The college requested a total of $462.4 million for its 6-year CIP. This request includes 3 new or substantially expanded projects: about $60.5 million for the East County campus, $4.2 million for the Germantown Student Affairs Building renovation Phase 2, and $72.6 million for the Rockville Theater Arts Building renovation. And in addition to that, there are cost increases for several existing ongoing projects. Earlier this week, as you mentioned, the county executive released his CIP recommendations for the college. The county executive recommended $381.7 million overall for a 6-year CIP for Montgomery College. The county executive's recommendations specifically included funding for the East County campus and specifically excluded funding for the Rockville Theater Arts Building renovation. As you mentioned, the committee does not plan to make decisions about specific funding during this meeting. However, staff does recommend that the committee send a memorandum to the college seeking a list of non-recommended reductions that would align the college's requested CIP with the county executive's assumed totals as it's done in previous years. The remainder of the packet is structured in 3 sections. First are the new or substantially expanded projects, followed by ongoing projects, and finally, recurring projects. I'll pause for a second if there's any discussion that the committee or the college would like to have on the introduction.
Well, I think we can probably handle pretty quickly, if assuming my colleagues agree, we unanimously to send you an official request for the non-recommended cuts, and we'll also say it to you today, and I know you know how this goes, but I think it's always good to have that best practice. Obviously, we want to hear from you about the importance. Obviously, I think most of what was recommended here was not moving forward on Rockville and then finding $8 million somewhere else. So you could talk about, from your perspective, we'd love to hear any initial thoughts you have on that. But without objection, if we could formally ask the committee, so we will do that. Is there do you all want to provide any feedback now on Rockville? I guess that would be my one question or in anything what's your initial reaction? Do you want to wait and put that in a memo to us? Is there anything you want to say about that today?
We will definitely. Thank you in advance for sending the memo. We will definitely reply to that with more detail. I will say that again, just to share, and this is repetitive, but it is an academic building. It does support an academic program and other courses that are in there, and it also is an asset to the community. And there's some basic things that have just outlived its life. And again, we're not asking for a new building. It is just kind of a reconstruction of it. And when we look at the wrapping of the building and things that if we don't take care of now, we'll be looking at greater issues down the road. So that is just kind of a brief overview. If any of my colleagues have more to add before we.
Well said. Yeah. Do any of my colleagues have questions on any of that? No? Okay. Scroopy, let's continue.
Sounds good. So the first category of projects we have are the new or substantially expanded projects. The first of those projects is the East County campus. This is a project for initial planning, studies, programming, facilities master plan updates, land acquisition, design, and construction of a new 4th campus in the East County. The project is intended to be a full campus. Montgomery College has requested $60.5 million total. That would be about $500,000 in fiscal year 25, $10 million in fiscal year 26, and $50 million that's currently scheduled for fiscal year 28. And I'll pause here if there are questions.
We're all excited about the East County campus, and the good thing is that it's in yours, it's in the executives, and I can't imagine it won't be something that we prioritize, but I'll defer to do you want to say anything about the East County campus?
It better be something we prioritize. No, I think so too. I think that the council has unanimously been very excited about this. This is a long time coming, and the potential here is just huge. There is some discussion about whether we might be able to pair this with Viva White Oak. I'm excited that conversation is happening as well. Obviously, the potential here, if we were to bring those pieces together and do kind of development at the same time, it would be a very symbiotic relationship in terms of bringing all the different kind of elements together and being able to make some really good plans and smart investments there. So very excited to see it prioritized in the budget, and look forward to having that conversation moving forward about what we can do about what we're seeing regarding the shortfall and the suggested cut to the Rockville component. But I will certainly say that as a District 5 council member, I'm very, very glad to see that the East County campus continues to be protected from all angles.
And we're joined by OMB, so good to see you. And we just did the Fairland Briggs Cheney master plan as well, which obviously envisions redevelopment of that area. So another symbiotic thing. Councilmember Alvarez has a question.
It is so exciting. Obviously, some of the costs will be dictated by what the academic areas of focus will be. And so just curious as to, how those conversations will be in line with the CIP conversations, acknowledging there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg here. But just any thoughts preliminarily on what some of the academic focus areas could be in East County and how that might impact the CIP requests?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Albanese. And absolutely, when we look at, the campus, I'm going to start with the ECEC, and we're looking at education and healthcare, entrepreneurial opportunities, also our non-credit opportunities in terms of training, right? So I think in the longer scheme, when we look at pieces, obviously it's engaging East County community, as we have already started to do, we have been doing, and simultaneously, what does the county need, right? So it's a structure and facility within the eastern part of our county in terms of what may be there. Simultaneously looking at, we know we have healthcare. Right. We know that we need educators. We know that there's other IT and cybersecurity. Right. So there are components that we know we need, and see how that's fluctuating moving forward. But yes, that will determine a lot of kind of the building structures. Having visited the Leggett building, and the math and science is going in there. Right. It's not
right.
A bunch of sociology classes. Right. There's labs and hoods and all kinds of other air exchange issues that are needed. But we want to be able to meet the needs of the county, and the needs specifically, obviously, of the residents of East County. So.
Got it. Thanks.
I'm a sociology major, Dr. Williams, so.
I am as well,
Okay.
Chair Joanna. That's why I feel like I can go there, because
Okay,
my undergrad's in anthropology and sociology. So.
All right. Well, Ms. Group, you want to continue?
I took a sociology class at MC. I'll just note for the record. It was a great class.
The second new or substantially expanded project is the Germantown Student Affairs Building Renovation and Addition Phase 2. As Dr. Williams mentioned, the building is currently undergoing a two-phase renovation and addition to convert and reconfigure the building to house the Department of Physics, Engineering, and Math, along with a Math, Physics, and Engineering Learning Center. The project will result in a net gain of 18,000 gross square feet to the building. And I'll pause there for discussion.
If there's anything you want to add, obviously this is I know a priority for many of us as well, and we've talked about the needs at the Germantown campus. But is there any background or color that you think we need to know about this project?
Sure. I don't want to be mindful of the time, and so I will turn over. Is there any details that I left out when introducing it? I ask colleagues to join in.
Nope, phase 2 is ready, and this is what the funding's for.
Okay. All right. And phase 2, and like you said, that's the smaller of the three, right? That's the 4.2 million. So we want to continue. It's started. We prioritized it, so it's good to know. Let's keep going.
Next up, we have the Rockville Theater Arts Building Renovation. The project is for the comprehensive renovation and expansion of the Theater Arts Building at the Rockville campus to address current facility problems and programmatic needs. In response to staff questions, the college laid out a little bit more detail, and this is included later in the packet, about what those specific needs are, as well as their urgency. The college also noted that it would be more cost-effective to work on all of these renovations at the same time, so that they could close the building and not have to worry about doing construction while other parts of the building were being used. The total request over 6 years is about $72.6 million. And I'll pause there for discussion.
Great. Yeah, and I know we started to talk about this, but other colleagues have questions. I'll defer first to Councilman Robinoff.
Thank you. You don't have to answer now, but just, there will be a deeper dive into this, obviously, as we go into the CIP. But in preparation of that, if you could just provide some background on the number of people that are currently served by that theater, how much outside use, how much revenue it potentially generates, which could help, with the argument that maybe at least some of these costs would be offset. I know it's a popular rental facility for the community. And how this particular theater fits into the longer range plans on how we can better activate the campus for outside community use. So, just those types of questions would be great when we do a deeper dive.
Great questions, and that'll be very helpful. And I was also going to say, just kind of really appreciate your prioritization of, I know you had to think about what you were requesting, and it's in 3 major areas, so we appreciate that. And soon to be 4 campuses, which is exciting, coming up. And so for the projects that have increased, the costs, could you talk about that a little bit? And are you evaluating any measures that could be taken to reduce or modify those costs? Is it just first, like, kind of what are they, and are you looking at maybe different designs or different approaches to try to address it in some way? You're realizing you're going to have to think about this more before you come back to us, but just wanted to know at this point.
So I'll begin by saying that some of the costs in terms of escalations, are just a function of where we are in the economy today, right, post-pandemic. And much of the work around looking at how we enhance critical systems in the buildings also contemplates how can we create more efficient energy uses as well. And so those are all part of it, and we'll be sure to elaborate on in the written responses.
Okay, appreciate that. Ms. Groupie, what else?
So I think we've already started moving into discussion of ongoing and recurring projects.
No, I'm all out of order today, sorry.
Yes, so the college has several ongoing projects, including college central plant and distribution systems, college-wide library renovations, college-wide physical education renovations, the Germantown Science and Applied Studies Phase 1 renovation, the Germantown Student Service Center, the Rockville Student Service Center, the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Math and Science Center. Some of these projects do have significant increases. One of the notable ones is the Germantown Student Service Center, where the college is requesting about 1.7 million increase from previously approved funding in fiscal year 27, and about $2.3 million increase in fiscal year 28. So I'll pause there for discussion, if there's any discussion on those college ongoing projects.
Yeah, and this was kind of let's just take that for an example. Could you just break that? What's that increase for? What caused it?
Okay, for the Germantown Student Service Center, the increase is a 5% cost escalation. That's a state allowable escalation through the state. Okay. And what it represents is an increase in the construction amount by 5%, and then the furniture and equipment amount by 5%. And it's important to note that this increase is 50% county funded and 50% state funded.
Right. Thank you.
Another part of, just to remind us that's a fairly significant development effort in that, if you recall, we're also consolidating a significant number of the infrastructure elements, right? And we're also, from an efficiency standpoint, rather than doing a separate library renovation and student affairs, it's consolidating as well, and it requires a significant upgrade to the infrastructure systems to make that happen too. So it's a pretty big project.
Makes total sense. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions on Mr. Groupie, anything else?
Finally, the college has several recurring projects. I won't run through them all. I will note that some of the projects did have fairly significant increases, including recurring projects under categories of information technology, network infrastructure and server operations, roof replacement, and student learning support systems. And I'll pause there for discussion.
So I think if we look at those escalations, so a part of, if we go back a couple years ago in the CIP, there was some planned reductions in the out year of the CIP that takes that funding down. The increases seek to restore what was the planned reductions. Ostensibly, if you look at aging infrastructures around our data centers, and these are really about, mostly if you think about them, keeping the lights on rather than doing some new fancy stuff around the IT components. So the network pieces around maintaining our ability to replace aging equipment in the data center to ensure that we are fully operable, right? The continuity of learning. The learning systems around how we ensure keeping classroom technologies, labs, up to date, recognizing that we have not had, as an institution, a replacement program in a number of years. The IT program has not seen an increase in over a decade, and so this is really around an effort to keep us competitive rather than innovate in some more dynamic ways. The general infrastructure IT component, that first category, is really looking at, again, critical systems around cybersecurity and modernizing and keeping modern our application stack. So they're really not new ventures. And again, it's trying to keep pace after not having had any significant increased investments in that area. There are, across each of those three IT areas, for I think 10 or 11 positions as well, funded in those areas.
I appreciate that. I think I saw OMB.
Yeah, this is Rachel Silberman with OMB, and I did just want to clarify that the $8 million that's in the affordability reconciliation project is cash funded, and it's due to the interest in just making sure that all of those current revenue increases are considered holistically with the operating budget, since it's all coming from the same pot.
Appreciate that. And thank you. I think it's an important point to make that this is not this is to maintain old aging systems as opposed to keep you the lights on, so as you said, not to advance us, which we obviously want to be doing too. So really appreciate that. Colleagues, anything? Okay. Mrs. Groupie, is that it?
And that's everything.
Okay, great. So as we said, we'd love to have your response to the non-recommended cuts, and we'll formally ask you for that, and you'll formally respond, and we'll continue these sessions, but really appreciate everything that you all do, and excited to keep the conversation going and with all the progress that you've made. So thank you. All right. You too. And with that, we'll bring up our next panel, which is our colleagues at MCPS. And I see we have the superintendent, Dr. McKnight. I think we have the chair, the board president, Carlos Silvestri, and we have Lynn Harris here, also board member as well, and other MCPS officials. I see Brian Hall and Seth Adams. And we're joined by Mr. Levchenko and Ms. McGuire, the dynamic duo on the CIP and council staff. So welcome. Good to see you again. And maybe what I'll do is start with the superintendent and the board president, or the board president and the superintendent, whichever order you guys see fit. And if you have any opening remarks, but we're excited to start this process with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, buenas tardes, Chair Jawando and members of the Education and Culture Committee. It's once again great to be here before you today with the opportunity to review the Board of Education's requested fiscal year FY25 capital budget and the FY25 through 30 capital improvements program. The Board of Education is committed to working with Montgomery County elected officials to address the many facility needs of Montgomery County Public Schools. We must work together to provide our students with the best possible learning environment. The board, as representatives of our staff, students, parents and guardians, and community, are responsible to request a CIP which reflects the essential funding to meet our schools' needs. The Board of Education's requested CIP totals $1.999 billion, an increase of $93.6 million more than the previously approved CIP. This includes providing additional funds to address budget shortfalls to have projects remain on their approved schedules. It includes funding for 3 new addition projects at Paint Branch, Blake, and Mill Creek Elementary School. funding for 5 new major capital projects at Twinbrook, Whetstone, Cold Spring, Damascus, and Eastern Middle School, Damascus Elementary School, that is. It includes funding for new countywide initiatives and funding to increase our countywide systemic projects. The board CIP request also includes additional funding to implement the blueprint for Maryland's future through capital solutions such as relocatable classrooms, the construction of standalone centers, and/or capital improvements to former closed schools. The request will address system-wide needs by increasing projects such as HVAC replacement, roof replacement, and planned life cycle asset replacement. A new countywide project, Healthy Schools, will provide matching funds for the state's Healthy Schools Facility Fund program to address HVAC, plumbing, and roof systems to improve the learning environment at schools throughout the county. For FY 2025, the revised state aid request is $246.3 million and is a combination of projects for both the annual state allocation as well as the Built to Learn Act funds. We will continue to work with staff at both the county and state levels to maximize state funding from both of these sources. We look forward to working with you to ensure that the many capital projects included in our request to address capacity and programmatic needs, as well as aging infrastructure, are funded. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. McKnight?
Yes, good afternoon, council members, our chair, Councilmember Jawando, Councilmember Albanaz, and Councilmember Mink. Happy New Year to you. I think this is our first time being able to come and be here with you in the new year. And today we do look forward to the discussion around our capital improvements program in MCPS. Much has shifted the landscape, as you all know, since we've been doing CIPs historically in the system. But I'd say over the last 4 years, a lot has changed, and I just wanted to highlight some of that. So I'd say over the past 10 years in MCPS, the enrollment has grown about 12,000 students. And the capital projects included in our capital improvements program have truly been addressed to accomplish the enrollment growth that we've seen over time. And so when I talk about the 12,000, of course, that takes into consideration the projection, the dip that we had during COVID-19, and then the coming back up of enrollment that we saw after we were able to bring students back into school. So really lots of transition that's happened over the past few years that we're just trying to settle within this CIP planning. The official enrollment, which is what we submit to the state every year, we submit on September 30th. I just always say the September 30th marks the day that we submit that information to the state. But as you know, a very mobile county, students continue to enroll in our district throughout the year. And so our enrollment this year as of September 30th was 160,223 students. And we did see a decrease of 331 students from what we had anticipated. So I want to then say, when we look at our enrollment over the next few years, all the way out to 2029 and 2030, we're projected to increase to 167,000 students overall. Okay, so we are still looking for growth to happen over the next few years. So this projection, while it does represent a slowdown in enrollment growth, in part due to what we see in declined births within the county, the capacity projects included in the CIP are warranted and must remain on their approved schedules. I also want to call out, we have identified some populations within our school system that have been very swiftly growing. Like, for instance, our special education population has been one. We've seen more students identified needing those services since COVID-19 more than we ever have. Our ELD population as well. As we know, our international students have been one of the most fastest growing populations as well. So when we think about what their needs are, and we've been able to look at where those needs tend to happen in our county, you know, we provision for all of that in our CIP, and I think those are things that we must take into consideration from lessons learned over time of who's coming to us, where they are, and how we have to provision for that. The CIP includes a total of 22 capital projects, 9 at the high school level, 3 at the middle school level, and 10 at the elementary school level. And of course, we've talked about this before, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we've seen a major change in the construction timelines. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before, but we oftentimes have to find ourselves extending, giving to the labor market that's available to actually be able to complete the projects. And of course, we experience lots of changes during COVID-19 with materials. So we've taken all that into consideration when we think about our timelines as well. But as a result of some of those things that have occurred, the requested CIP includes a 1-year construction timeline extension for the following 4 capital projects to align with the anticipated completion dates. And for the August 2026 completion dates, we have listed Joanne Lelick Elementary School at Broad Acres. And for August 2027 completion, we have 3 high schools: Damascus High School, Northwood High School, and Charles W. Woodward High School, which is one that we are reopening. So on March 28th, the board adopted the boundary study scope recommendation to determine the service area for the reopening of Charles W. Woodward High School. And the adopted boundary study scope will need to be adjusted to align with the approved completion date of August 2027 now. So we want to make sure that those 2 things line up, the new completion date of Woodward along with the boundary scope study as well. So there are 2 additional capital projects, the new Crown High School and the Damascus High School major capital project, with the same completion date, which also will require boundary adjustments. So therefore, during the next few months, we holistically will review needed boundary adjustments with respect to these particular capital projects. And so I just wanted to highlight those for you today. Those are my comments,
Thank
and I
you.
think we can jump into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Superintendent. Really appreciate it's always good to ground in, this is not disconnected from our growth and who we are and the needs and all of that. So that was really helpful. Turn it over to Ms. McGuire and Mr. Levchenko. I think we have a presentation today. Just flipped the script on you a little bit.
We did, thank you. And we do have some slides just to help focus some of the overview. And again, we will, as we did in the previous item, pause for questions, and certainly anytime the committee would like to interject. Dr. McKnight went through a lot of the information about the enrollment projections, and as was indicated, certainly the figures for enrollment have begun to climb from COVID-19, but not at the rates that we had seen previously enrollment growth occurring prior to the pandemic. And so as a result, what we do see is that some of the actuals are coming in lower than the previous year's projections. But again, as Dr. McKnight outlined, the system is projecting an increase in students of about 7,000 over the 6-year period. So I just want to comment also that the figures that you're seeing here and that are presented in total do also include the pre-K figures. That's certainly an expanding area of growth for the system under a number of the blueprint and other directives. However, it is separate from sort of our K-12 projections as well. So we're sort of still looking at how to integrate those numbers when we look at the whole. We did present, there's actually 2 pages to this chart, and it is also in your packet. Certainly wanted to continue to include economic and racial demographic information in alignment with the racial equity and social justice focus of the council, as well as MCPS, all the agencies, and the county executive. The county executive did mention in his budget recommendation release the use of a racial equity analysis tool in the capital budget to align with some of the measures that we've taken in the operating budget. And what we've done here, again, I don't really expect anyone to try to read this on this slide. It is in your packet, but we did want to summarize the demographic and other information specific to the schools that are put forward in the CIP for projects. We will continue to bring this back as a backdrop as we look at the projects specifically, and again, go forward when we are having more conversations around the affordability and other aspects project by project. Just to flag also here the equity emphasis areas. This particular column here will need to be updated. That a current year analysis is still ongoing, so this reflects last year's analysis, but we will bring back the current information as it's available.
Yeah, and just pause there for 1 second, because I was going to figure out where to bring this up, but I think this is a good time. You mentioned the lowering of birth rates, like, that's happening. The only continent growing is Africa, right? Europe, U.S., all declining, birth rates. So we are similar in that regard. But we have other things happening, right? You said we have increases in special ed, we have increases in our international students, our ELD students, and then at the same time, we have capacity issues right now, right, where schools are crowded. So I would love just what I would suspect to see from that is that growth that you're talking about to get to the 167 is going to come in the higher grades, right, as we go in the middle school and in the high schools. Is that what you're seeing, and how are you planning? Obviously the kids that, if there's less students being born and we have issues now, we would expect to see the surge be moving up, right, to middle and high school.
Yes, absolutely. And I neglected to say we are joined here at the table by our Associate Superintendent Seth Adams and our COO Brian Hull, who will help us also facilitate the conversation. I'll defer to Seth to talk more about how we project the birth rate, but I will speak on your specific question around the capacity currently and how this kind of balances out. So I spoke about ELD enrollment or international enrollment being one of our fastest growing populations within the county. And yes, that is oftentimes within secondary. And so when I say secondary, middle, and high school. And so not only do we often talk about how we have to provision for needs for students who didn't start here in Montgomery County, but the space becomes really critical. And that's why I said earlier we've been able to look at different areas of our county where we've seen a lot of the enrollment increase for our international students. And, that's where we see some of the capacity growing in some of those schools, and can anticipate that and take that into consideration. So, yes, that's the capacity piece is real there when you think about that particular group of students who represent a fast-growing population, and they're coming in secondary, which is really impacting our middle and high schools. I'll say for identification of special ed, we see that across the range. Now, we don't often identify students needing special education services as often like in earlier grades, kindergarten, first and second, as we may see later into elementary, that then goes into increased services in secondary as well. So I just wanted to make sure you had that picture to know how that represents capacity. Seth, do you want to speak to the birth rates?
Yeah, and then Mr. Adams, no, keep your mic on, and then also talk about how we avoid what's happened in the past where we overbuild to deal with the boom now. And so how we, and it's not, and I know it's not an exact science, but we should learn from our previous mistakes and think about how we handle the current need, but not go too far.
Yes, Councilmember Jawando, that is a great point, and that is a big part of our CIP process is to balance what we see in terms of growth and also implementing relocatable classrooms. There was a time period before where there was a goal to obviously reduce and not have relocatable classrooms. We see that now, though, as a really viable approach. That's why we're looking at different modular type of buildings that can last longer than relocatable classrooms. But yes, so that we're not in a condition where we're overbuilding. But what I will say, just jumping back to the birth rate piece, we are looking at birth rates. We call that capture rates in terms of how many births happen and then how that translates to kindergarten. That number has come down pretty significantly since COVID. It was usually in the high 80s. It came down as low as in the high 70s toward post-COVID. It's creeping back up, and we think that's going to continue to grow. But this year it was lower than what we projected. But as we start to build out our pre-K programs, we do believe that the pre-K will translate into a greater capture rate. So seeing more kindergarten students because of the pre-K program. So we're not necessarily seeing, we're not predicting lower numbers as students come in. We are seeing that as pretty steady. But where we are seeing much of our growth is from, international enrollment that does occur through all levels of our school district. We obviously see a lot of transitions once you get to the secondary level. Students may be in different programs throughout the county that are not associated with the district, transitioning to the school district in the high school level. So we do see swings in terms of what the middle schools look like and then what that cohort looks like transitioning up to the high schools. But we don't necessarily see lower numbers coming into the system. We see that pretty consistent, maybe just marginally increasing because of capture rates over time. But also a big part of what we are thinking around enrollment this year is some of the economic elements associated with school districts. So higher interest rates mean less mobility, less people moving out of the county, allowing more new families to move in. Development has slowed a bit, so we're not seeing the same numbers coming through development. So there's a lot of factors that sort of represent what we're seeing today. But again, we're pretty confident that we will still see growth over time, but also weighing that with not overbuilding. So that is something that we're talking about. Much of what you will see in the CIP is at the secondary level that is there, and it's not going anywhere. That's where we have the 14, 15, 20 portable classrooms at some of these high school projects, and that's we're seeing that sort of cohort of students maintaining at those schools, and that's why we look at these as critical projects for us to manage our capacity.
That's helpful. I appreciate that. You guys okay for now? Yeah. Go ahead, Councilman Roberts.
Thank you, Councilmember Warner. I guess what gives you that confidence that you think the numbers are going to go up? Because it's not bearing out. Just as Councilmember Jawando mentioned, this is a global phenomenon, and there's an entire generation of people that are just not having kids for socioeconomic reasons, for a number of different reasons. And I've talked about this before from the dais, but Woodward High School was closed because there was a population decrease, a significant one. And the big argument in the late 90s and early 2000s in this county was which schools we were going to close because of the population decreases. Now, obviously, that went back up again. But you mentioned you have some confidence. I'm just curious as to what gives you that confidence.
Well, it really is based on trend data. Looking at everything that's happened over the course of the last 20 years. Looking at it from the perspective of where we are located, federal work, federal jobs. Looking at it in terms of trends around development. Everything that's happening from Northern Virginia to us. Looking at our long-term development goals as a county. So that is really what we're looking at in terms of confidence. Are we expecting another 12,000 students like we saw over the past 20 years? No. But we are seeing, that moderate growth, through both housing turnover and the development policies of the county. So, unless obviously there was a drastic change in federal government jobs or the ability to attract families to this area, we don't expect to see anything like that we saw in the late 80s, 90s, where we saw that dramatic reduction in student enrollment.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Well, I can say the E&C committee is doing its part. We have 10 children between us here, so cumulatively, 4, 4, and 2. So we are doing our best. And I will say one other thing, since we have the demographics in the farms rates. The elementary school average for almost 48% farms here. These are within the projects, but I know at the system-wide, it's 43% ever farms, obviously higher. That factors into what we build too, right? Like, who are our kids, right? Who are our families, and what are their needs? And I think, we're dealing with this in a lot of different ways. Even if you look at our planning department, growth models on just growth in general, they say something similar to what you're saying, which is that we're built out. We're not there's not a lot of, it's all infill development now. We have the ag reserve. So, but we will see modest growth, they project, over the next 10, 20 years. Not knock your socks off, but enough to, 1% or, around, each year. But how are you factoring in because we see a trend line, obviously, of the needs of our students increasing, right? And the demographics have changed dramatically. How are you factoring that into your request of how you build and what you build? Could you talk a little bit about that?
I'll just say, and Seth, I'll turn it over to you. It's a great question, and this is why we do a lot of the community engagement around our CIP process, because it becomes important for us to think about what is important to the community and how do we take that into consideration about how we build. In terms of the programming that we have in place for our students, I would say over the past 2 years, Mr. Adams and within the Department of Facilities and our Curriculum and Instruction Office have actually been meeting to talk about that very thing. You know, what's needed within these schools, given, you know, who are the students that are there, what are the interest areas, and what do we need to consider facilities-wise for any population that we see represents a majority in some way. So that's been something that we've been able to do over the past 2 years more intentionally to get at exactly what you're asking. Mr. Adams?
Yes, and I would add, you know, there was probably, we were talking 5 years ago, there was a transition in how we look and identify our major capital projects.
Right.
It actually transitioned to the major capital project portfolio from the view of looking more holistic at our schools and what the needs are. You'll see, obviously, you see on the chart, you know, as farms grow, as we see demographic shifts change, there's a programmatic element associated with that. Class size reduction. Our Title I schools have very different needs. You know, we've built out community schools. So when we start to look at these projects, it's not purely just infrastructure anymore. It's looking at it from what is the needs of this individual building infrastructure? What are the needs programmatic? What are we seeing from trends from that particular school over time? And then obviously, if we're able to maximize multiple approaches with one project, partnering with HHS, partnering, you know, with other organizations, that's our goal right now, to maximize every dollar that comes in. So it is a very different approach from before, when it was purely infrastructure that we were looking at. We're looking at it from a needs perspective, a programmatic perspective, and trying to tie a lot of those elements together with individual projects, which I think you'll see on that list of what we're doing there.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's been a big change just since Councilmember Alvarez and I joined the council, about how we did the CIP process for schools. That was a huge shift and a positive shift. And I'm just often reminded that there's never, I just want to say this, there's never enough money. There's always a lot of need. And, you know, I can think of schools, you know, I always hesitate to mention schools, but that I've been in that are not on any list that have need right now, that there's not enough space. And, you know, and some of that you can address through the more general funds of, you know, that are in the CIP to do small fixes, but there's never, you know, it's tough. So I want to recognize that too. You okay? Yeah, Councilmember May.
Thanks. I'll just note too a crossover between this issue. You were talking about how some segments of our population are absolutely growing at much faster rates than kind of the wider population, such as, for example, the special ed population. And of course, when you look at the classroom needs, those are very specific, and that's like more expensive facility space. There's bathroom needs there, you know, all of those different things. But also noting the crossover with operating budget, because if you don't have the staffing to be able to fill those multiple classrooms, then you can't have the classroom size, the number of students per instructor, all of those things. So just noting that as we, you know, obviously we'll be continuing this conversation on the operating side, you know, at other sessions. But just want to make sure that we're taking that into account, that, you know, obviously you've been looking to make cuts wherever possible, but that there are some areas of the operating budget that are going to be less amenable to that, less able to absorb that, because the populations are so heightened. So like I would be very concerned about seeing cuts in the special ed department, for example, because we already know that we've got significant staffing problems there. We have some spaces, you know, in some schools, again, I'm not going to mention school names, but we've been in some where we know that they are struggling to find the staffing to be able to use the facility space that they have, and now some of that space is being repurposed for other things because the budget's tight in other places and all of those things. So I'm gonna leave it there, but just noting that when we come to the operating budget, there are going to be some places obviously where we're tightening our belt, but somewhere where we have to make sure we are making those investments in order for some of these CIP investments to pay off.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to say thank you, Councilmember Mink, for raising that, because this is a conversation that we will be continuing and operating, as you said, but also with our community. Now, I know this is not about operating budget, but it's a good point, because as we are making cuts in the system, we are protecting those specific areas that we know are critical, and special education is absolutely one of them. And so I just want to reassure you that that has absolutely been the lens in which we have looked at that in terms of where we can look for fat and cut it, and being very considerate of where we should not look, as we know that there are certain areas in which we need to still find more staff and others to support. And we're doing a deep dive in special education generally overall as a district. Quite since the pandemic, and as I said, when you think about who our kindergartners are, who we've heard from our teachers in the early grades that are coming in and they haven't developed in a way that we have seen them over the years. Those were the 2-year-olds during the pandemic who were not getting access to a lot of the things that traditionally they would have. And so we're looking at what that impact is, and not saying that we need to move them into a track of identifying them as students receiving special education services. Some of them just need more time. But in fact, the need is there. And when you translate that to how does that play out in facilities, there are things happening in kindergarten that, previously we didn't have to worry about that was taken care of in preschool. That's actually not the case right now. So those are different dynamics that are coming into play. And how this fits into the CIP piece is we are being intentional about that in how we build. We often talk about the amount of bathroom space that we need in our pre-K facilities just to make sure that, our staff can accommodate teaching students those skills. That's important. We talked about community schools. In this class specifically, we talked about schools that have a high representation of farm students. Well, in many of those schools, especially since we've now identified additional schools as community schools, and I know many of you have had a chance to go out and visit, that in our community schools, there's a whole production that is now a part of a school to be able to provide resources and services to families that are taking up space that I would say 5-8 years ago we didn't plan for. And so now when we think about the cost of a school building, and we're looking at like our farms rate, we are taking into consideration what is the space that's needed for those community school setups that we have, that we found and heard from our families are so successful in helping them to meet basic needs so that our students can come to school and be more prepared and feel connected to their school, recognizing that we go beyond the services of just providing them academic support. So when we think about our CIP over the past few years, I will say there are a number of ways that we are building now that we did not 4 to 5 years ago, that takes into consideration some of these programs and demographics.
Thank you. Turn back to our staff.
Thank you. So starting to dive into the specifics of the board's request, what this slide shows is the comparison of the board's FY25 to 30 CIP in comparison to the most current approved, which is the FY23 to 28 amended CIP. As you can see, it's an increase of $91.8 million and totals just barely under $2 billion. It also does include significant increases in the early years of the CIP, which is an annual challenge. It's a perennial challenge that as those projects move forward into the CIP, those numbers get higher and higher as we go in, and again, certainly leads to affordability challenges and concerns. This is a summary of the board's CIP. Ms. Silvestri and Dr. McKnight went over a great deal of this. Certainly, excuse me, there are new projects including new addition projects, new major capital projects. There are also substantial construction cost increases in some previously approved projects, increases in some of the systemic projects, and as was mentioned, construction delays in some projects as well. So again, we'll walk through the impact of all of this, but this is just a quick at-a-glance summary of, again, sort of what is in the CIP request. And while there are new projects, I think we can see that certainly there's a balance between adding new projects and continuing to address the cost increases and other challenges that are being experienced in ongoing existing projects. So we'll move on to some of the other affordability considerations.
All right, so on this slide we show the executive recommendation, which we just got the benefit of receiving this past Tuesday. And as in past years for the MCPS CIP, the executive has primarily modified the MCPS CIP with what we call an affordability reconciliation project. You heard something similar on the college side, and there's also one for parks, but it's much more substantial on the schools side. On the bottom of the slide you can see it's about a $91 million 6-year hit, but more notably the first 4 years you have about $346 million less provided than what the board proposed. Now in the end, just not quite sure, don't know I've seen this before, but the executive recommendation matches the amended CIP in the 6-year period. But there's so much going on. There's cost increases, there's new projects, there's differences by year. So we're going to have to really go through this and identify that. But just the basic takeaway from this is that we have a significant gap to deal with just in the schools piece of the CIP. We do have some other issues in the rest of the CIP as well, which the whole council will have to take up. But just this slide really emphasizes that we have a lot of work to do on the MCPS CIP alone. And part of that reason is, on this next slide, the executive's macro assumptions, starting with spending affordability, which he's consistent with what the council approved earlier this fall. The council's approval basically kept the SAG numbers at a level consistent with what was assumed in the amended CIP, so there's not additional room provided in that. The executive did recommend increased PAYGO in the CIP, and he talked a little bit about that at his press conference, primarily in 24 and 25, not so much in the later years. But that provides a little bit of money, but not nearly the kind of numbers we're talking about. And then some of the other traditional areas like recordation and impact taxes, as well as state aid for school construction, are basically flat. The increases that we talked about with regard to the recordation tax change last year is already baked into the numbers now. So we're not seeing, while we're seeing increases from that, we're not seeing increases from economic activity per se. So we're not seeing a change from what we were assuming some months ago. So that number, and as well as the state aid, is roughly, the executive is recommending roughly where the amended CIP is. So none of those areas on this slide point to a magic bullet to get us to reduce some of that gap.
Well, thank you for the rosy picture.
Always helpful.
So I have a couple questions here that I was struck by when I was reading when the executive presented, and I know we have OMB here too, and then what you presented. Basically, the 91 million is the same number, pretty much, right?
Right.
Give or take.
Pretty close, but there's so many puts and takes in that, and the years are different in terms of where the gaps are.
Where the money comes
but
from.
yeah, that's why it was somewhat interesting that we ended up in the executive recommendation right at the amended 6-year total.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn to OMB, I guess, first with the question, and then maybe the superintendent. Well, let me ask superintendent first. Did you all discuss with the executive in OMB your request in the context of what he sent to us Tuesday was almost the exact reduction amount of what your increased request was? Well,
So I will say that, yes, Mr. Hull and Mr. Adams have been in contact with OMB to, share with them exactly what our needs and spaces are, but I'll let them speak to that specifically, but we intentionally have been in communication.
okay. Mr. Hall?
Yeah, there was no discussion that I'm aware of, and Seth, correct me if I'm incorrect, where we talked about, landing in a certain spot with the 6-year total.
Okay. No. Okay. So
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Giovanni, I think you were asking, did we share with him previously exactly where we wanted to
Oh,
go?
I know you've shared your request.
Okay, yes.
But he answered the question I think I was asking. Was
Okay.
was there any, it's just, I've never seen this in that way. Maybe Keith has, I don't know, where Nessie hasn't either, where it's almost like it was intentional. So I want to know from the OMB side, is that just a coincidence, or?
So what I think it would be helpful to provide some more context, and you've heard a little bit about that on this slide here, but as you're aware, general obligation bonds are flat.
Sure.
Our recordation impact taxes are down in the first 4 years when the requests were significantly higher, not especially for MCPS, but countywide as well as the other on-site agencies. So that was a significant challenge. And as you've seen, there was more than $500 million in requested increases in those 4 years where we had less available to support what was requested. So the county executive was able to accommodate a $167 million increase in those first 4 years, and to do that, he had to push out a number of transportation projects that much needed. So getting to this place where he was able to maintain the previous funding level was quite a challenge, but it was something that we were able to accommodate by making those additional adjustments.
Right. So your perspective is, look, we made it to the mark of what was previously approved, and that was a struggle.
It was a struggle.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else from our staff that you want to add?
Not on this slide. I mean, we're going to get into a little bit more detail going forward.
Okay.
If you're ready to go forward.
Yeah. Any questions from colleagues at this point? Okay. Let's keep going.
Yeah, just, I mentioned the state aid briefly. This slide shows the amended state aid assumption amounts for FY 23 through 28, and then the executive's recommended numbers for 25 through 30. And once again, the 6-year total is pretty close. Now, the one concern that I think we all have is that the Built to Learn program, which gave us a pretty significant infusion of dollars about 4 years ago, or starting 4 years ago, that program will be fully allocated, or the amount that was allocated to the schools, to Montgomery County Public Schools, will have been received, most likely before the end of the 6 years. Right now, there is no successor program to that, so we still have the traditional state aid program, but that is a lot less than the two programs combined. And unless there's a big increase in the traditional program statewide, which we haven't seen in many, many years, it's usually in about the $300 million level statewide, or some other successor program to Built to Learn, we could see some significant drop-off in the state aid assumptions. These numbers are very big historically for schools, $530 million. In the past, we were seeing 30 to 40 million a year, or maybe 50 million a year. So these numbers represent success in terms of getting state aid. Now, unfortunately, a lot of it has gone towards construction cost increases and supply chain issues and competing with contractors with other jurisdictions in the state. But it did help us, along with other decisions the council made, to try to soften the blow the last few years in terms of the NCPS CIP.
Appreciate that. Thanks. And that context is important too.
Now just getting into the CIP a little bit. We presented this slide a couple of years ago when we last did the full CIP review for the prior E&C committee. MCPS's CIP priorities, which are listed in the superintendent's proposed CIP or recommended CIP out around November 1st, these basically just show a rough prioritization, but of course they've got to cover a lot of different areas of the CIP. No one priority takes all the money in the CIP, but I thought it is important to show that these priorities are reflected in the superintendent's book, and we should keep them in mind as we go forward. And when we talk about non-recommended reductions as well, this will also play a part in that. And in terms of the council staff's review and priorities, we've noted on this slide some of the issues that we have to take into account. We've talked about the racial equity and social justice considerations, which has become a county-wide, budget-wide operating budget, CIP, legislation. So everything that comes to the council, we're trying to put in place processes that allow us to take a look at issues this way. The Climate Action Plan recommendations also come into play here, both in the operating budget and the capital. And MCPS has been very active over many years with its building program in terms of building green buildings, which is much of what they've done on the climate side. But that's another area we look at. The state aid implication for projects, we've talked about the state aid amount. To the degree we move projects around or delay projects, that could have an impact on state aid, so that certainly factors in. Projects that are getting a good percentage of state aid may warrant more consideration before we delay them. Also, we look at new projects. We have a very difficult time funding what's already in the CIP, so we need to be very judicious about what we add to the CIP across not just MCPS, but across the entire CIP. And then in particular for MCPS capacity projects, we will look at the enrollment and utilization at the particular schools involved in the capacity projects. You saw some of the county-wide numbers, but of course what really matters with these projects is what's going on in the area affected by them. And once you break the numbers down into more of a micro level, a lot of times those big fluctuations at the county-wide level are relatively small at these levels. And so if you had overutilization last year, you often still have it this year in that project. So we will look at that, though, and make sure that the assumptions still are valid for projects that the council may have looked at before. And then for the systemic projects such as HVAC, PLR, roofs, we will look at the annual level of efforts for those projects. There's a couple of issues there. First, county-wide, we have tended to underfund these projects over time, both not just in MCPS, but also in other areas, general services, parks, college, et cetera. So we are cognizant of that. We can't always provide 100% of what we want, but we do want to keep that in mind. And we do have an infrastructure task force report process that we're working on now that we'll have a new draft report out hopefully in early February, and that'll give us a better sense of where we are on these projects. The other thing with some of these is they tend to be funded, you heard this a little bit with the college, some of them are funded a little bit heavier in the early years, and then they are lighter in the out years. But the need is pretty steady. So in some cases, there's a built-in gap that we have to deal with as well. And of course, as I mentioned, we've got this general affordability issue with the executive's recommendation, which considers all the revenues coming in and all the expenditures going out. So we have to balance that. Just real quick with the board's requested projects, we do try to batch them as best we can to identify areas. We talked about the new projects. There's a significant number of new projects, and by new I also mean new projects within the major capital projects arena, those umbrella projects, elementary and then secondary. But then you also have approved projects under construction, some approved projects that are not under construction, and then we'll also look at the countywide projects, some of which don't have any change recommended in them, but most of which do have some change. So this is just a summary of some of the new projects, the individual projects and the major capital projects. You heard about Blake, Mill Creek Town, and Paint Branch. Those are addition projects, but then you also have a whole slew of elementary school major capital projects moving in, and then also construction for Eastern Middle School is new in this CIP. It's an existing major capital project, but it didn't have construction before. So those alone add up to about $250 million in the 6 years. And then there's a number of approved projects that are under construction to some degree. They may have just started this year, or they may have site work going on, or they may be right in the middle of their major construction work. So that's a huge number. If you look at the bottom of this, it's about $1.4 billion. So that's the total project cost. About $977 million are in some stage of construction. So some of these could be very difficult to reconsider or stop midstream. There may be some that aren't far enough along, and we'll look at that, but this means that we've committed a lot already to projects that are moving forward. And then there are a few that are not under construction yet. So there's a little bit more flexibility with these, but once again, we'll look at the needs associated with them, the capacity issues, and we'll also, as we talk about in a minute, we'll ask the schools for their prioritization and where they would find the dollars to meet the executive's budget, and whether they would look at some of these ongoing projects and or some of the new ones. I'll let Essie take us through some of the county-wides.
So as was just mentioned, there are there are three projects in the countywide systemic projects that do not reflect any changes at all. These reflect the approved funds. And there are two new countywide projects requested, one for the Carver Educational Service Center modifications and one for Healthy Schools. And again, we'll certainly follow up to get more details on those projects, but those are the two new projects in the non-specific school arena. There are actually 2 pages to this slide as well, and this is also in your packet. The level of effort projects that again reflect efforts across multiple schools across the district. Most of these projects reflect increases. We've kind of made a few comments in the side column. Most of them reflect an increase in the request in the early years. Some of them also do request an increase in the levels of effort going through the out years, but primarily there are additional funds requested in the early years. One area that, again, we'll get more detail on all of these, but one area with significant increases is the ADA compliance project, and certainly there's been a lot of discussion across many schools of the need to really continue to have significant effort to address those issues in schools. Last year there was also an increased level of effort then, but it's been requested at an even higher level for these years. And this is again just the second page of that same chart, again just continuing to show the same dynamics. I would just highlight that the technology modernization project also does show increases. We do tend to take up the specifics of technology modernization in conjunction with the operating budget, primarily because it is completely funded with current revenue. So we've included it here just because it is technically part of the CIP, but we tend to reserve our review of that project for the operating budget. I just would comment as well, and again, this is a conversation that we do, it does recur each year. There are a number of projects that, again, fall into this level of effort bucket, but that don't show funding throughout the 6-year period. And there are a number of reasons for that. Some of it is because the scope of the project work is decided on a more cyclical basis. Some of it is because they're fairly new. But nonetheless, if you did project out that if we were to continue funding at these levels throughout the rest of the 6-year period, it would add significant dollars across the rest of the 6-year period. Just conclude there.
All right, so just to summarize some of the challenges that this committee will face in the MCPS CIP, we have the large undesignated reductions and deferrals that would be required in the executive's recommendation. That's related to the fact that we have cost increases in existing projects, we have new projects, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the MCPS CIP, by its nature, effectively does tend to be a little bit front-loaded, so we have that issue. And then, as we mentioned also, the out years sort of conversely tend to be a bit understated. So if we do try to solve some of that level of effort problem in the out years, it does complicate this a bit. So we do have that challenge as well. And also, of course, in those out years, we can expect that the schools will have a new round of major capital projects that they'll want to do. So we've had some discussions with OMB over the past year or so about how to better reflect the needs of MCPS in the out years so that we don't over-program early, for instance, in transportation or elsewhere, and then have a annual reconciliation exercise where we have to reduce other areas to try to protect some of the MCPS CIP. So that's an ongoing discussion. There's not an easy answer to that, and ultimately each year the council has to decide what its priorities are. So we'll see how that process works this year, but that is something that the committee should be cognizant of, that we do have this out year issue as well. And in terms of recommendations for next steps, because of this large affordability gap, staff does recommend, once again, that the committee formally ask MCPS for a list of non-recommended reductions that would bring it in line with the executive's recommended CIP. It's not to say that we are going to blanketly support the executive number, but that becomes a helpful baseline to make sure that we at least have a point of reference as we go as to what would be needed to get there. And to the degree there can be adjustments elsewhere in the CIP up or down, that will also affect what we can do here. But that is a helpful exercise. It's one also that I know you asked the college for help with as well. So we do suggest that, and that we would send that out and ask for it back in time for us to take that into account at the next E&C committee meeting, which would be in the late February, early March timeframe.
And quick
Thank you.
apology for the outdated board
Yeah.
president reference. I apologize for that.
We will send a letter to President Sylvester. And we love former President Wolf, but it just shows you how much, the last time we did this exercise, I think, the full CIP, we had a different president. But thank you to our staff and to MCPS, the team. I know it's a difficult dance here, and to OMB for answering those questions. I just had a couple questions. We will, without objection, I think, send a formal request to the board that you would send us your non-recommended cuts to meet the county executive's level. We obviously have to look at the entire CIP and the entire budget as one whole thing, and we want to make sure we're factoring in your prioritization as we work together, as always. A couple things I wanted to note: the HVAC replacement. So that was a huge increase in the first 2 years. It's always an issue, but just what has gone into the need to really, in your mind, between last year and this year, to, I think I saw it was $35 million over the next 2 years, as opposed to normally it's half that. So what are we trying to accomplish there in your, and how long is the backlog? I mean, it's an issue we hear a lot about going into schools and from parents and stuff, so I know it's a real issue, but could you just give some context to that issue?
Sure, I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Mr. Adams. It's a combination of two things, the backlog being one, and we hear, every time we do these CIP hearings from our students and our staff about, needs at schools. And then the other piece is the cost increases, and Mr. Adams can provide some more specifics on that. But along with just about everything else in construction, replacing and repairing HVAC systems has gone up significantly in the past, several years.
So yes, and that's actually the key point here. The inflationary pressures actually have impacted the HVAC market more than the rest. I think the electrical areas obviously have been similar, but our backlog has grown even though we've had some consistent funding because we've been unable to keep up based on the current market conditions. And I'll give you a perfect example. Before COVID, we were able to replace an elementary school complete HVAC system with state-of-the-art ventilation systems that we do today for about $1.5 million. Today's dollar,
So $1.5 million?
$1.5 million. Today's market value for a similar project is right around $5 million for the same project. So this has been an area that has been impacted significantly. So this is an increase beyond the past few years, but unfortunately it is trying to get us back to keeping pace with the replacements that we've committed. And obviously, as you've heard, that has been a really focal area of our capital improvements program is providing those mechanical systems that obviously do the comfort, but more importantly, the indoor air quality, environmental conditions that are expected in our schools.
Thank you. I just think that's context for as I like to say, for the millions watching at home. That is like, that's insane. In 3 years, that something would, triple in price almost, nearly. And when you take that across 211 schools and the backlog, and it's also an area where we hear from parents a lot, and coming out where people want it to be up to date and need it to be up to date, right? So, the other question I had, and then I'll turn to colleagues to see if they have any, is on the delays to Northwood and Woodward. Those 1 year delays. Obviously, this has been something that there's a lot of need there, and people are wanting to get in. What has led to that? Is it again construction costs, or where are we, and why are we in this situation where even you're saying it's going to have to be another year?
Sure. So it shows as a delay in the CIP, but it's for us, it's really just an extension of the construction timeline. So this past summer, we opened 4 elementary schools, and that they've really were not completely finished to the level of what we would want within that duration. So when we
started the school year at one of them,
it was
Chevy Chase Lake, or what was that? Which one was that?
Cabin Branch.
Cabin Branch. Yeah.
It was a tough one down to the last few days. So with the materials market, it just takes so much longer to receive equipment, as Dr. McKnight mentioned. and coupled with the impacts we're seeing to the labor market, these projects are just very difficult to complete under the previous durations that we had set and had been successful for many years. So when we looked at the Northwood project, that is a project where the students are going to go to the Woodward School as their holding facility. And when we've worked with our construction teams, the construction experts, they really looked at it and said 2 years is extremely, extremely tight in terms of the timeline. And we're not exactly sure we can make it purely based on when we'll receive different types of equipment and materials over time. So the idea here is that there's going to be significant cost associated with even attempting that 2-year timeline, and there were no guarantees we were actually going to meet that. So the decision was made, and again, trying to be fiscally responsible as well as obviously focusing on our families, is that it made more sense to extend that to a 3-year construction time period so that when students transition back into the facility, it is complete, and that there are minimal impacts to them when that transition happens, coupled with the fact that we were able to save significant dollars based on that transition and timeline.
Appreciate that. Thank you for that context. Colleagues, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Councilman Roberts.
Thank you, Councilmember Rondo. Obviously, we're going to do a much deeper dive as we go down. I did, so when the county executive presented his CIP to us, and I'll clean this up, but he implied, and I understood where he was coming from, but we built these spectacular schools that are absolutely gorgeous. The challenge, however, is being able to sustain that level of excellence with capital projects moving forward. And obviously, when you walk into one of these newly renovated new construction facilities, you want your kid to have the exact same thing. The challenge, however, is the sustainability financially of that. And so I'm just curious as to, it's a much broader question, but maybe as a follow-up, how you're taking into account the additional construction costs that didn't exist when we built those spectacular schools over the last 20 years. And that same school now costs, more than twice as much to build, which means that some of the newer schools may not have some of these spectacular atriums or other wonderful amenities, because we just have to be realistic about what we can and can't do.
So that is a good point. I know we've also heard, sort of the idea of, are we building too grandiose? I would counter that, say our construction costs are lower than almost all other LEAs in the state. They're significantly lower than those of Virginia schools. So we are very fiscally responsible when we build. We do look for low cost, sort of found ways to infuse architecture into our buildings. And we feel that's important because if students are excited to come, if they feel like there's an investment in them, then it's something that makes sense for us. But I would say we've gone through a significant value engineering process at all schools. We've removed entire floors from schools like the Woodward building. We've cut close to 40,000 square feet out of the Northwood High School building. Same with Crown High School. We removed an entire floor of that in order to bring these projects within budget. And what we're doing is we're not shortchanging the academic experience. We're tightening things up a little bit. You're not going to have as much elbow room as you may have in the past. But the idea of not providing something that's a necessity for students, you get to a point where why build at all if you're not able to build the basic necessities. So we do push back and refute the idea that we're building grandiose facilities. They are nice facilities and they're expected to last 50 plus years. But we are, and that's certainly data we can show, very fiscally responsible with what we do and how we do it, and that's very and that's comparable to other LEAs and other districts within the metropolitan region.
That's really helpful, and especially the comparison to neighboring jurisdictions. And we'll have to remind ourselves of that as we have these conversations moving forward. And if there's a way that we could even quantify that, because we do have a message that we need to tell to our broader public, as we deliberate. But I think that would be helpful. And then, now that we have these facilities that we've been building over the last 20 years. I would imagine that there's at least some outcome data on how a newly renovated facility impacts student morale, staff morale, or anything that could enhance the argument of why it's important to build such facilities, I think would also be relevant context as we have these conversations and make these difficult decisions. I love the slide prepared by staff that very clearly stated what the priority areas are. The 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can't remember how many there were. But that's helpful context as well, because you all went through the same thing internally. And so there's a real connection there. At the end of the day, this is going to be viewed within the context of very important transportation and infrastructure projects across the county, which are also very important. But that happens every CIP. We just happen to be, entering a tough economic situation, and we have had tremendous support from our state partners, which we won't have as much of in this next CIP, unfortunately. So we look forward to the robust conversation. I'll just remind the general public we are on the same team. We're going to disagree as we go through this process on some specific line items, and it isn't because we don't care. It's just there's a practical reality of a balance and a dance, as Councilmember Jawando put it, that we have to go through every 2 years. And we'll do it. We'll get through it. But thank you all very much for this presentation.
Appreciate that. And Mr. Adams, you kind of casually said something that I think needs to be shouted, and Councilman Robinaz underscored it. You need to absolutely quantify and demonstrate our costs vis-a-vis the region. I mean, I think it is a common, sounds like misconception amongst people who are informed that we're spending way too much to build luxury buildings, so I would want to formally ask you that you present to the committee as a part of the CIP process, and maybe we can just even include it in the letter we send, so that the public knows that we've asked a cost comparison, over the last, whatever period, long enough to see between Northern Virginia and other Maryland school districts and that shows where we are, because I think that is that's important, to know. And in addition to all the other things you said, we want to build buildings where kids want to show up, where they feel invested in. We were all at Odessa Shannon recently. You can't walk in that building and not feel good, about starting your day, and so that's important. And so yeah, if without objection, colleagues, I'd love to ask for that. I think that'd be helpful. So, turn to Councilmember Mick.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Second that. Third that. Just noting also that, again, when we get to the operating budget, that the tie-in with some of the CIP expenses, I think, is close, especially when we look at, for example, like maintenance positions and that sort of thing. So feel free to talk through when you come before us for operating budget, how some of those pieces might tie together. I remember that specifically talking about HVAC maintenance and repair, that those were some of the line items that you were looking at having to potentially cut. So just thinking about again, the investments that we're looking to make on the CIP side, and if we're looking to stretch those extra dollars, if there's tie-ins with decisions that you're making on the operating side, I want to make sure that we're able to fully understand that as well.
Please.
Can I just put in a plug? Again, I just wanted to kind of underscore the importance of also making sure that we're trying to tackle this front-loading issue for the school system CIP, because it should not be such a struggle to just maintain the previously approved funding level. And we do end up in that place when the first 2 years we're holding so much more capacity than the last two. When those 2 years move out of the 6-year period, we're left with a much smaller baseline to work from. And so, I think it is in everyone's collective interest to make sure that we're setting aside a more even amount of money in each year so that we can all work towards, kind of a more stable position from one CIP to the next.
No, yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, these last few years have, it's hard to do that when you have a HVAC that raises 3 times, but traditionally we've had this problem. So yes, and you said, Mr. Levchenko, there's a work group that's pulled together to talk about that.
Well, on
Informal?
on the infrastructure side, there's
Okay.
a task force report that will be coming out in February.
Okay.
That will help show where the different agencies and departments are in terms of their level of effort in these different programs.
Got it.
Now, a lot of that will show that the spending tends to do this as you get further into the CIP. So that's one of the factors that causes some of the underfunding in the out years. But with the school CIP in particular, you tend to have projects that are about 4 years long, and the schools are requesting them in year one. So you do tend to get a drop off in years 5 and 6. So if you don't put some sort of placeholder dollars there, or have a very large set aside in the
Right.
CIP, which we have a set aside, but it's not that large,
Right.
you're going to have that cliff. And so we struggled with that with the last few years.
Yeah, right.
We don't have an answer right now, but it is something that council members should be cognizant of. That we don't want to overprogram the out years and then give something and have to take it away.
Right,
the
and
next
none
year.
of us want to do that. I mean, and we're always in the situation where, though we figure it out, where we're, people are disappointed, they feel that they've had something. So I don't know if there's any, we're not going to solve it here today, but, I do think we need actionable solutions from people who are doing this every day, of O&B included, the school system included, our staff included, and anyone else, about how to tackle that. It has always been a problem, and it's hard to tell people. We do, but I'll not a totally analogous example, but I'll say with our reserves, we have 16% reserves this year. When Gabe and I started on the council, we were under 10%. We set a goal to get it up, and that's money that does not get used, right? So it's set aside every year, and there's some people who argue and that we shouldn't set aside that much, but maybe there's a way we factor into the CIP some sort of goal of, particularly on the MCPS side, of setting aside more, and that people might not like that because the need's so great, but so I just throwing something out there, but I would love to hear back. We should follow up on this outside of the CIP, immediate need conversation right now. And so we'll work together with you all, and I'm glad you raised it. We share your concern. Do you have anything initially to say about that, Seth? Do you have a solution?
Sure, we always have solutions, but
Okay.
I would say it's been a product of new schools or reconstructed schools. I mean, they're bigger ticket items. One of the things we've talked about is transitioning to a greater emphasis around our systemics, maintaining, stretching the life of our buildings over time. That way you have more of a consistent, annual expenditure. But the large projects, the large capacity projects like these high school projects, I would say as they are delayed sort of year after year, they get pushed back. What we're seeing now is that over years of delays through reconciliation, they're all stacked up. And I know that those completion dates, are all similar now, and that sort of reflects a quote-unquote front-loaded CIP, but that's been the reality of where we've been over the past 10 years with these projects, the cycles associated
Right.
with budget cuts. So transitioning away from the several larger projects and moving more into the systemic work, the maintenance, the HVAC, would start to level out those expenditures and have it more consistent over time. But
Also means less schools being built.
Then you
over time.
have the challenge of the advocacy. Obviously they want great air conditioning and they want to have consistent indoor air quality, but you can't see those. They're hidden behind the ceilings and walls. So you can invest $35 million in HVAC. You can leave at the end of the school year and come, and it's a brand new system. You can't see it. So I think the visibility of our new schools has shown that investment over time. So that's a tough one to move away from, but also those large schools do create the quote unquote front loaded first 4 years of the CIP projects.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Dr. McKnight. Thank you, President Silvestri, Mr. Hull, Mr. Adams. Thank you to OMB. Thank you to our staff. And we will continue this conversation. So we'll send this letter to you, and please get back to us as soon as you can in the next couple of weeks, so that we can come back in February and or early March and take the next steps in the CIP process. But with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.